All right, so have we got many tennis fans in the room tonight? Who's a tennis fan? Oh yes, there are a lot of you. Okay, I love tennis. I picked up a racket for the first time when I was 13 years old. And I decided that there and then my career goal was to become the next Steffi Graf, right? Do we remember Steffi? Yeah, #1 women's tennis player for 7 years, right? My goal was to be Steffi. This is what I wanted to do. And at the time, when I was 13, my coach was like, yeah, you can totally be the next Steffi Graf, right? And I completely believed him. But looking back on that now, it was a complete lie, right? I just picked up a racket. I was terrible. And like the kind of sports that I excelled in involved chess pieces, not balls and rackets, right? But anyway, I think he said that like just so my parents would buy more lessons. But anyway, one of the things that he taught me was the way to hit a really good tennis shot is that you need to aim the ball right in the center of the racket, which sounds really obvious because where else are you going to hit the ball? Like you're not going to try to hit it via the handle or something like that. But it's actually really hard to do, hitting the ball right in the middle, and it's called hitting the sweet spot. Right? And when you hit the sweet spot, it's like this magical feeling where your racket becomes this powerful instrument and it's like your whole body vibrates and it just becomes effortless to hit a good shot. Right? I barely ever hit the sweet spot, but anyway. But tonight, I'm not actually here to talk to you about tennis. I never did become the world #1. That's shocking, isn't it? Yeah. But I want to talk to you instead about the innovation sweet spot and what that is and how you can hit that. Now, I want you to think back for a moment over the last couple of weeks and the kind of tasks and projects that you've been working on. And when we're working on any kind of a project, there are 3 different kind of states that we can be in. So the first kind of state that we can be in is we can be working on something that's a really massive challenge and we don't have the skills or the resources to rise to that challenge. So we end up feeling really, really stressed. Who has felt stressed in the last couple of weeks? Almost the whole room. Wonderful. Another state, like the opposite state that we can be in, is we can feel bored, right? We can be working on a task that we just don't find challenging. Maybe it's a task that we've done many, many times before and we could do it in our sleep and we're feeling bored. So who's felt bored over the last couple of weeks? Yeah, quite a few of you as well, right? You're like these extremes. And then the other kind of state that we can be in is that we can feel challenged by something, but we feel like we've got the skills to rise to that challenge and we're kind of in this state of flow, like right in the zone. But unfortunately, what research has told us is that we spend over half our working lives in these first 2 states, either stressed or bored. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is how you can move more into this 3rd state, this innovation sweet spot, and what that means. Since we're talking about innovation, one of the problems with innovation is that too many people believe that it's a dichotomy, right? You're either born creative, you're this creative genius, or you're not creative, and so just like go become an accountant, something like that. Any accountants in the room? Just lost them. But look, I'm kidding. I want my accountant to be very creative. Anyway. But what we know about creativity is that that is actually not the case. Now, scientists love to study identical twins, so 2 humans that are genetically the same. And the reason why studying twins is so exciting is because you can determine what are the things that you're born with that you can't change and what are all those other things that you can change through what you choose to do with your life. Now, what scientists have figured out is that only 30% of creativity is genetically predetermined. So what that means is that 70% is up to us. So there's been a lot of research into how to do this. How do you access your inner innovator and how can organisations help you do this? And the research has looked at all sorts of variables from things that organisations can do, things that leaders can do. But what I want to focus on is looking at things that individuals can do. So things that you or I could single-handedly do to become a better innovator. And what we know is the single biggest thing that for any of us will improve any of our innovation ability is that we need to find challenges. Seeking out challenges is the number one most impactful thing that we can do to drive innovation. And in fact, when we feel challenged, we are 67% more likely to be innovative. But it's not just about finding any old challenge. Now, who remembers the story of Goldilocks? So Goldilocks was this girl that broke into the house of 3 bears, and she slept in all their beds and she ate all their porridge. It's quite a piece of work, really. And what do if you remember the porridge part? Like, she had to eat through 3 bowls of porridge to find the porridge that was just right. So just like Goldilocks found the porridge that was just right, we need to do the same for challenge. We need to seek out that challenge that is just right. So if we were to graph the relationship between challenge and innovation performance, we'd kind of naturally assume that it's this linear relationship. The bigger the challenge, the more challenged we feel, the better our innovation performance is. But what's interesting is that this is actually not the case. The relationship between challenge and innovation performance actually looks more like an upside down U. Or at this bottom left-hand side, where there's no challenge, where we're doing things that we could just do with our eyes shut, we don't perform particularly innovatively, and in fact, we're bored. And when we're bored, we're not creative. But the converse is also true when we're working on challenges that are just too big and too stressful because we don't have the skills to rise to that challenge. Innovation performance also declines. So what we need to do is we need to seek out the innovation sweet spot, where a challenge is big enough to challenge us and excite us, but where we've got the skills and the resources to rise up to that challenge. So the sweet spot formula, it's got 3 ingredients, 3 things that you all need to seek out to find that innovation sweet spot. First thing you need is you need a really big challenge, something that excites you and maybe scares you a little bit as well. You then need the skills. You need the right match between the challenge and the skills so that you've got the skills to rise to that challenge. And then finally, you need the resources, time and money, to be able to solve that challenge. Because you can have all the skills in the world, but if you don't have time and perhaps a bit of money, then it becomes pretty impossible to find that sweet spot. Now, this is a picture of my grandfather. And my grandfather is a man that solved many different challenges during his life. And he also had a thing for birds as well, but that's a story for another day. So my grandfather was from a little town in Poland called Zolochew. And in January 1943, a really big challenge presented itself. So we got word that the Nazis were going to be invading his town. And for a Jew living in Poland during World War II, that's a pretty big challenge. So my grandfather thought about what to do, and he thought, well, maybe we'll just leave town. It's kind of the obvious thing to do. But he thought, well, if we leave town, they'll probably just find us there. So instead he took on the challenge of how could him and his family and friends survive. And he thought, what if we went underground? Like, maybe they won't look for us there. So my grandfather took on the challenge of building an underground bunker. This underground bunker was 15 metres long, so about the length of this part of the room. It was about 2 metres wide, so the width of a couple of rows, and it was about 2 metres tall, so a little bit taller than me. It's a joke. I'm short. I'm 5'4". So we built this box over the course of 5 months, and for my grandfather, this turned out to be the perfect challenge, right in the innovation sweet spot, because my grandfather was a woodworker, and he worked on building projects, and he had 5 months to build this underground box. So after 5 months, my grandfather and his friends and family, 24 of them, went down to live in this bunker. The day after they went into the bunker was the day the Nazis invaded their town. So it was bloody good timing. So there they lived for 361 days. My grandfather went out twice to get more supplies, but otherwise they were underground that whole time. And on the 361st day, my grandfather heard this British voice coming from the mayors of sewers that surrounded the bunker. And it turns out it was the voice of a British soldier. And he'd come to tell my grandfather the best news that he'd ever heard in his life. told my grandfather that the war was over and that they'd survived. What my grandfather found out a few months later is that from his little town in Poland, Zolochev, which prior to the war had a population of around 14,000 Jews, he found out that only 50 of them survived the war. And half of those survivors survived because of my grandfather's bunker. Now, my grandfather avoided doing the obvious. He avoided just leaving town, and instead he took on this challenge, the challenge for him and his family to survive. And he was able to find that innovation sweet spot, because I suspect that if my grandfather wasn't a woodworker and if he didn't have 5 months to solve this challenge, then he probably wouldn't have found that sweet spot and he probably wouldn't have survived, and I certainly wouldn't be here today. And while this is a really extreme example, of course, like hopefully most of us will never have to find the innovation sweet spot for a life-threatening situation. Whatever that situation is that presents itself to you, your first challenge is to find that innovation sweet spot. And what we need to do, like between you and me, right? We need to stop accepting any old challenge that our bosses are giving us, okay? You can tell your boss, Amantha said, no, you can't take that on, okay? So instead, we need to seek out that sweet spot. We need to find the right mix, the challenge that is just right, where we've got a big challenge, but we've got the skills to meet it, and we've got the resources as well to rise up to meet that challenge. Because if we find the innovation sweet spot, who knows what might happen? You might end up saving half the lives of your town. Or at very least, if you find that sweet spot, you will definitely improve your tennis shot. Thank you.